Good afternoon, everybody. Mary Hunt here at the Water Office, along with Diane New and Annalie Martin. There she is.
And Haley and Allison.
All right, so let me just announce, this is kind of a fun thing. Water, never content with the ordinary. We were asked by both the University of San Francisco and the University of Santa Clara in California in the US if we would cooperate with their classes on feminist theology and offer internships to their students at a distance. Wow. And so the two women whom we just mentioned, Haley and Allison, are current water interns, and they are students in California. And so during this semester, while they're having their class in feminist theology, they're reading voraciously on the Water website and coming to programs like this and doing projects. And Haley's working on a writing project, and they're both taking notes today that'll probably show up someplace. They might be live tweeting this. So it's really kind of a new wrinkle, but isn't that fun to have them get academic credit for this sort of work together, and we get some of our projects done. So anyway, it's a good day in the Water Office. I'm delighted that this is February the 23rd, 2021, and we are here for the WATERtea with Dr. Susan Brooks Thistlethwaite. We had this brainstorm when Susan gave the Pat Reef lecture in October of 2020. We'll talk about that in a minute. That program is housed at Claremont Graduate University. It's sponsored by several Immaculate Heart entities, including the Immaculate Heart community, and several groups related to Mount St. Mary's University in Los Angeles, among other generous sponsors of that lectureship. Our brainstorm was to extend the conversation that began that night about Susan's lecture, Information Apocalypse, to a broader audience, and that would be us. So we gather as Water. Hopefully many of you have had a chance to watch the video of the lecture, but it's a new moment in history, Susan. We're not in 2020 anymore. Yeah. Post a certain president who will remain nameless, but with all of the complexities still obtaining that Susan named so sagely in her lecture. I'm glad we're dealing with these issues now, while there seems to be a public but not a private lull in the action. We can't be seduced into thinking that these problems have been solved just because a major player is out of the center ring, at least for the moment. Water programs, as you know, are aimed at supporting and igniting social change. Whether in feminist theology, ethics, or ritual, our efforts are geared to bring together solid academic scholarly data with the activist commitments of our Alliance members. And today's program is a good example of that. Inspired by Pat Reef, a scholar activist par excellence, and led by another such scholar activist par excellence, Susan Brooks Thistlethwaite. So here's the format. I'm going to introduce Janice Poss, who is the coordinator of the Pat Reef lecture series, and she's going to give a very brief introduction to Pat Reef and to the series. Then I'll introduce Susan. Susan will then make some remarks. And again, I hope you've had a chance to listen to or watch the lectures, really terrific. And perhaps you've also read Susan's book, Women's Bodies in the Battlefield, which would be important, even if you haven't done that, be important to do following this. Then we'll be open for questions and discussion. We will close officially, as we always do at the top of the hour. That will be 3 o'clock Eastern time, but we'll leave the Zoom link open so people can continue conversation or ask a question or something you might have been anxious about and there wasn't time for. But we do close officially at 3, so no one feels compelled beyond the time to which we are committed. And the video of this session will be on our website at www.waterwomensalliance.org, along with notes. So don't worry if you miss something while Susan's talking. We can always get you the URL or a reference in the notes. With that, I welcome Janice Poss, who was with us actually recently when we talked about the Notability volume. She's a doctoral student at Claremont Graduate School, involved with the 1,000 Women in Religion project that we discussed in the Water Talk with Colleen Hartung and Elizabeth Ursich recently, getting women into Wikipedia, which is a terribly important project. And I think so many people, Janice, went away from that session just so indebted to you and to the other colleagues, because it's such a crucial next step for changing information. So I offer you Janice Poss, who is the coordinator of the lectureship, and you can tell us about that. Welcome.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Mary. And thank you for hosting this Water Tea with Susan and inviting me to just say a few words. And, you know, most of, I think, what you said I was going to say, but every year this lecture series, which is now in its 18th year, 19th year coming up, we invite a feminist theologian to speak to our students at CGU and local feminists and international groups such as Pilgrim Place about topics that Pat Reef held dear. And if you don't know who Pat Reef is, I'll explain. She was a stalwart feminist teacher, scholar, philosopher, and activist, which is how we label her, and an over 50-year member of the Immaculate Heart community, which was originally a Roman Catholic canonical order of women, which was inaugurated in 1849 in Spain. The Los Angeles chapter broke from the Vatican in the late 60s for embracing the changes enumerated by the 16 documents of the Second Vatican Council. The documents instrumented transformation and modernization throughout the church. The film Rebel Hearts premiered at the Sundance Film Festival just last month, and it documents the community's story as they discern their break as a canonical order. The extensive archival records and in-person interviews with those who broke away are wonderfully poignant in the film, and it's well worth seeing. Susan was our 18th speaker for the lecture last October when she spoke on the topic we're going to hear about today. She attracted over 189 attendees, and therefore it's fitting that we should spread it to a broader audience, as Susan had said, or as Mary had said. And I hope you'll enjoy what Susan has to say, because I'm excited to hear about her update at this point. And now I'll turn it back to Mary and Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice, for your work on the Pat Reef lectureship. And it's my understanding that all of the previous lectures are available in an archive. Is that correct, Janice? So that people can watch those if they wish.
We're just setting up, we have a YouTube channel, so I've got your lecture and Susan's lecture up, and I'm working on sort of editing. I have like 6 others that we filmed. Unfortunately, many of them are either lost in the archives of CGU, or, you know, we have to see if we can find them somewhere. But it's a project in process, as many.
Yes, good luck with that. Susan, I think we're the alpha and omega, because I did the first one and you've done the most recent one. So we've got the bookends. Let me introduce, and also the movie Rebel Hearts. Diane and I watched it on the premiere for Sundance, and it is marvelous, just a marvelous film about a community that broke away. Were really pushed out, frankly, by Cardinal McIntyre in Los Angeles in the late 60s. This is the order of Sister Corita Kent, you know, the artist Corita. And they were pushed out by this recalcitrant Cardinal McIntyre, who didn't want them to teach in his schools, as if they belonged to him, his schools, because they wouldn't wear their habits and they wouldn't do what he wanted in terms of their prayer and living and so forth. So he forced them out. They formed a separate community. That's a topic for another day, but really we should watch the movie and discuss it, because it's a wonderful example, as Susan pointed out in her Q&A at the Pat Reef lecture. It's a wonderful example of women's agency. Let me introduce Susan, and then we'll get right to the heart of the matter here. Susan was with us for a water talk in September of 2020 when she spoke about one of her mystery stories, When Demons Float. In that book and others in the series, we saw a vivid exposition of today's big agenda: racism and white supremacy, hatred of all things Muslim, weaponized misogyny, and the impact of the cyber world, especially on the weak. White men who are preyed upon, enlisted, and eventually coaxed into violence, the likes of which we're witnessing and have witnessed up close very recently. Susan was also with us in April of 2016 when she spoke about her book, Women's Bodies as a Battleground, Christian Theology and the Global War of Women. That book remains vividly relevant today, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, vividly relevant. She's professor emerita and president emerita at Chicago Theological Seminary, where she taught for 20 years before serving 11 as president. Prior to the presidency, she was the director of the PhD center there. Her own PhD is from Duke, as well as her master's and a BA from Smith College. Susan is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, author or editor of at least 16 books in theology and ethics. In her retirement, I use the word advisedly. She maintains an active presence on blogs. She has a regular column in the Vale Daily, where she lives in Colorado. And she is now the writer of this Kristen Janelli mystery series, 3 of which are out, including Where Drowned Things Live and Every Wickedness. I love these books, as I made clear during that session. And she has another one coming out soon. It's not in that series, but another one with a new character. I'll say no more. As founder and former trustee of Faith in Public Life, she's been on the advisory committee of the American Academy of Religion section on religion and politics, which section she helped to found. She's consulted with the Carter Center. She's really an activist at heart. And what she said in the Reef lecture about putting your body where it matters to claim agency, to write locally, and to resist white supremacy is what she does. Her primary concerns are violence against women and the violence of war. And God only knows she's had plenty of material to work with. But as a mother and as a grandmother, Susan Brooks Thistlethwaite sees the big picture: climate change, economic injustice, structural racism, structural sexism, structural xenophobia, structural heterosexism, which will be with us into the future unless we stop them now. Using both the arts and critical theory, both fiction and long-form writing, Susan is exposing and trying to resist the information apocalypse, and she does it as well as anybody I know. Welcome back, my dear, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Mary. Here we go. I have, in fact, continued to think about the issues that I brought up in the Pat Reef lecture. How could one not? And these are extremism and polarization. The information technology. Now Mary, I want to just put them back into a gallery view for just a second, because there is a participatory aspect of this, okay? You are not a passive recipient of this stuff. This is one of the things I want to get out here right in the beginning, okay? Now, the information technology is an accelerant for damage. And it is particularly damaging because of its lack of embodiment, right? It's capable of the kind of anonymity where your Twitter feed can be full of threats. And now they've had to move over to Parler where they can all threaten each other. But I want to see a show of hands. Who's on Facebook? All right. Who does Twitter? Okay. Reads online news. There you go. Online news. Okay. Every time you click on a story, you are feeding the algorithms that behind what you see on the screen are calculating what you choose. And it's they're not doing it for any purpose of giving you better information. They're trying to figure out the products that they're going to put in front of you on the side of your page. Now, when you click on a story, you become part of the information apocalypse, okay? Because the more polarizing, more and false, skewed, clickbait headlines, and believe me, I spend more time on a column's headline than I do on the content. I can spend hours on writing the headline. Why? It's mostly the only thing that people read. Maybe the topic sentence. But the grabbier the headline, the more polarizing the headline, the more you get sucked in. And the recent occupant in Washington was an idiot savant about this. This is a location in our cultural evolution, which is an impoverishment of language. The simpler the words, and there's all kinds of research on this, the more people are willing to click on it. Doesn't threaten them because they may not know the word. And so sensationalism and polarization drive your choices, yours, mine. And so it's really easy for Putin and the trolls to get at us because we have preferences. We have, I have information preferences. And I make it a point never to click on I click on a story, but I won't repost it, which gets the algorithms all, ooh, they reposted it. And, that drives more hits. And hits is what they're after because they want to sell you the soap powder. Okay. And it drives more hits. So I try to look for two sources on any given story. Okay. I will post the Washington Post because I know they have a two-source requirement because they used to reject my columns if I didn't have two sources for everything I was quoting. So it's not only a matter of creating the polarization, it is magnifying it. We're so easy. We are so easy as a society. We are so deeply misogynist, that to troll you, all they need to do is show that. Now, you're not a misogynist yourself, you're fighting misogyny, but a headline that magnifies misogynist statements by politician idiot, they gotcha. And I'm gonna finish up with critical consciousness, but you gotta be aware of your own actions in cyberspace because you're part of this. You help drive the story or not drive the story. And I know I've done this for decades now. I've written for the public and I know exactly how to hook people. I know it very well. I drove Rush Limbaugh stark raving mad with that headline about Mary Magdalene. And I did it on purpose. And Breitbart went after me and he went after me and all the rest of these right-wing trolls. And I wanted to because they hate it when we take ownership of our Christian faith. I hate it. So I did it on purpose. And, it's a way to make noise. I really did nothing to build bridges with the conservatives from that, okay? So, that's another issue. But I was trying to make this misogyny as visible as I possibly could. Now you're all going to say, because you're sophisticated about this sort of thing, that ain't hard, Susan. And I know that's true. But for some people, misogyny is hidden from that, right? It's just like on the one hand, on the other hand. Same thing with racism. We are such a deeply, deeply racist society that, Blacks for Trump, I put this in the lecture, Blacks for Trump was run out of Romania by a bunch of Romanian white guys. Seriously. And these completely non-existent Black people liked, this particular Trump policy and so forth and so on. But the polarization works. It works because, the stories may be fake. The Romanian troll farm was fake, but the racism is real. It works because it's real. The manipulation of misogyny works because it's real. And it feeds the polarization. And as you may, have noticed, the polarization via conspiracy theory is getting worse and worse and worse. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. I rely a lot on Orwell. I tweeted, that if Orwell hadn't written, we would have had to invent him because the discernments of what drives fascism, his, newspeak is language that's impoverished, right? The Big Brother is trying to suppress the capacity to even think in complex linguistic ways. So they take away words. Well, the previous occupant, what did he have? A vocabulary of 24 words, right? Great, bad, and that worked. That worked. And doublethink. The ability to simultaneously hold two conflicting views and consider both of them true. The previous occupant was sent by God. The previous occupant had, how many wives? I don't even remember, and so forth, right? You can think that. You can actually think that. The height of this was, of course, Kellyanne Conway arguing about, remember the size of the inauguration crowd? And, there's photographic evidence, right? Photographic evidence. It does not matter, Chuck Todd says to her, but look, here's the facts. And she said, well, we have to put out alternative facts. And, for those of us for whom thinking is not just an occasional occupation, you go, I'm losing my mind. But Orwell already said, right? Already, that's fascism. That is fascism. It does not work to shout. That's not true at these people. The fact does not matter. This is hard. This is very hard. We can go back and say, yes, they're dismantling the Enlightenment, okay? But the Enlightenment was not that great for a number of reasons, and rationalism doesn't exist anyway, and it is deeply patriarchal. So we can come around to that, but it does not matter. It does not matter if you say you're arguing with someone, which is pointless, on Facebook, and you say, but that's not factually true. That's pointless, right? Does it work to change the person's mind if they're deeply into this cult thing? No, it doesn't. But language itself, it requires lying. In the sense of, all right, in the development of language, we imagine the hunters, they're out and they're hunting. And one guy says, bison there, right? And everybody goes, right? The bison. If that guy is lying, says bison there, so he can go over here and get the actual bison, he will be ostracized from the community, okay? There's language and fact had a relationship. But they all go back to the camp and they're sitting around the campfire and they're talking about the great bison in the sky. What's that? What's that? Is that lying? Language also developed the capacity to imagine through the arts, through poetry, through music. All of that is the way in which language actually forms culture by not having a one-to-one relationship with observed reality. The capacity to imagine, I am going to argue, is our, and there's no panacea, believe me, this is no panacea, but it is a way out. I also argue in the lectures, as you've seen, embodiment itself, all right, to feel as though you are being acted upon is depressing. You feel powerless. You feel like you can't do anything. And there's so much we can't do anything about. But even during the pandemic, the marches for Black Lives Matter made a huge impact. And there's a whole literature in the peace movement on the centrality of the march. This is Gandhi. This is Gandhi's march to the sea for salt. The history of nonviolent direct action is rooted in the march. And marches are not riots. Don't ever call what these people did on January 6th. I heard one Republican saying, well, it's just like the Black Lives Matter marches. I don't think so. That's, another lie. But it's seeing, being seen, acting, not being acted upon. And the capacity for these actions themselves, not only to empower people, but to change the lying narrative, That's what we have to do. And this is a big lift. But 15 to 25 million people over those months participated in the Black Lives Matter marches. So it is performance. It is the performance of the truths. I am very impressed with President Biden's ability to perform grief. I mean, the man knows grief. He knows it well. But that's different than being able to perform it. The lights along the reflecting pool, the lights on the white, 500,000. You can't rationally come to terms with that. That's the city of Atlanta, gone. And yet they performed with the lights surrounding the door and the black mourning. They didn't say anything. It's a moment of silence. Performance is not so much the words. And it is why, of course, that ritual is so powerful. It's so powerful. Performance can tell deep truths. Mary mentioned my moving to fiction. And at first, when I retired, I was like, I'd always wanted to write fiction. I like murder mysteries. And I wrote the first, mystery novel. It was ghastly. It was just so bad. Everyone was me, and they were lecturing everyone else. So I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop for several summers. I took their advanced fiction writing classes. And the most helpful thing they said was, don't tell, show it. So you as the reader have to enter into the story. So here's an example. Okay, I had written The Detective Was Brave. So flat, it's boring. You give the reader all they need to know, they might as well walk away. So I changed that. And in the first novel, I have my detective and her then boyfriend, and they're in a construction site, and they hear a sound, and they look over what is an elevator shaft under construction, and there's a woman drowning in still setting concrete at the bottom. So my detective grabs a rope and rappels down the side of the elevator shaft, puts a rope around the arm of the woman who's drowning, climbs into the niche where they would put the elevator doors, unties the rope, and has people now at the top pull this woman up and then send the rope back for her. What do you learn about my detective from that? She's brave. She's also a little crazy. She'll throw herself at stuff that seems impossible. She's athletic. But you, the reader, have to conclude that. And I began to see that from all the feminist theology I had written, it was better to perform it. So the first novel is about the sexual harassment of a student and how difficult it is. And believe me, for decades of being a professor, to get someone to report sexual harassment, sexual assault is so difficult. And many of you may know this. It carries within it the shaming and the blaming and the fear of retaliation. And so I performed that in the novel. The second one is on prostitution, something I wrote a book with Rita Brock on prostitution, and we researched that for 6 years. Something I know a heck of a lot about. Performed it. How do women get sucked into prostitution? And the one Mary alluded to that I discussed with the group is about a group of white supremacists who infiltrate a college campus. But feminist theology itself is not passive. It's active. It is itself an activist premise, because we say this shall not stand. If you don't say that, you're not a feminist theologian. You're not. You're just a tourist. And I tell that to the students all the time. So art, music, drama, fiction is a way to perform in the face of this fire hose of lies and conspiracies. I'm on novel number 5 now, and I have invented a QAnon, a guy in the novel who believes the QAnon conspiracy stuff. So I've been reading it, and it's nuts. It's just, it's hard to create a believable character who has been sucked into this stuff. It's astonishing. But I think these people are walking around among us, and surprisingly so, able still to hide the conspiracies. So critical thinking is still obviously very important. To be able to step back, you look at a story online and you say, I say to myself, am I even going to click on it? Am I going to choose to feed this algorithm? Most of the time, I try to get to a primary source. So if it's a story about a congressional hearing, or I can watch the live feed or the tape of the congressional hearing, I will choose the live feed. I don't want somebody's digestion of this. I don't want to feed that. So you got to, when you approach your computer, it's not exactly a ticking bomb, but it's not a neutral act. It's not a neutral act. So I assigned Amanda Gorman's poem at the inauguration. Another show of hands. How many people had the chance to read it? Yeah, look at you all. You're such good students. All right. So I wanted to throw things open, if I may, Mary, to a discussion of what you think of this poem, what you think of poetry itself and its capacity to get people to see things in a new way. What was she after in this poem? And did she succeed? So, Mary, do you want to moderate? Do you want me to moderate?
I'll be happy to. First, I want to thank you for laying out yet more material here. I mean, the lectures were rich enough themselves, and yet you've added to this, and I think brought this up to date, especially it's as if October when you gave the lecture was 30 years ago.
Right.
Things have changed, and yet they haven't changed at all. And I think that's the really important part of your analysis, that the underlying issues that make us, that not only bring us to click, but that make our clicking and the discussion of our clicking reinforce what's already there is a very important point. And I don't think a lot of people think about that. They think that somehow misogyny and racism emerged in the last 5 years, and frank fact is that they didn't, and they're not going to go away in the next 5 years. So this kind of analysis is very, very helpful. I want to open the floor. Anybody who wants to do two things. One is what Susan has suggested, which is a certain discussion of the poem, which many of us, I think, saw performed, and hopefully have had a chance to go back and read or hear performed again. It was quite remarkable as a performance, Susan, and I think that's that underscores that point. So that's one thing. What was she trying to say? This young 20-something, as it were, just graduated from Harvard, who was launched suddenly into a remarkable career as a major poet. And what does she and her generation, several of whom are present with us thanks to the interns, have to say that's really important to hear? So that's one thing. And then the other is, of course, after we have a shot at that, some of the questions and comments that you have on other themes that Susan has raised. So the floor is open. I know Rosemary Ganley has already put something into the chat about the importance of what Susan's saying, and that Rosemary, just looked up the word algorithm to understand what that means and what its place is in all this. And
would it be helpful if I explain that?
Rosemary could probably as well, but go ahead, Susan.
Oh, yes, Rosemary, go ahead.
I'm teasing. Go ahead. Yeah, I mean, it's important for people to know what the role of algorithms is in all this. Go ahead, Susan.
Susan. All right. So look, there are computer programs that tabulate the hits. They tabulate the directions. They do analysis. I mean, it's all without, this is written in code. This is not human beings doing this. And when you hit on something, it registers within the analytical program. And people are, the social dilemma. That's right. But I'm trying to get at, when you look at something online, when you participate in social media, this itself is now a political act. Okay, get that. and try to use that power wisely. And thanks for the question. I shouldn't have used that term without defining it.
Cynthia Tootle has a question. Thank you.
Well, I'm more of a comment. We were talking about the Amanda, and when you said the performance is not the words, I was totally charmed when this young, vibrant Black woman in brilliant colors and hair wrapping, it was like just her coming to the microphone among that environment in and of itself was like a joy.
Was.
Yeah. So
And
the words were, it was like she personified a new era in just being there.
yeah. Well, and I think you're absolutely right that it is a performance. It was a performance, which is why I had wanted you all to look at the video, of course. And I'm sure we all have. We've watched it numerous times. The hand gestures, the looks. But I have also found, I'm not saying that words don't matter, of course. I have found so many new things in reading it and then going back to the performance. But I'm grateful that you underline what a powerful performance it was. President Obama sobbed through the whole thing. He's got daughters about that age. And he's always had a soft spot for girls. I noticed that over and over and over again. But she was, to me at least, the future we want to live into.
Yeah, she was also sort of an antidote to everything that had come, the poison that had come before. It was almost as if in that moment we received collectively the antidote. Right. And it felt like something new happened after that. Yeah, go ahead. Who's next?
Gail, go ahead.
Thanks. Just to follow what Cynthia said, I was so mesmerized again by Amanda's bodily and hand movements that were so much part of the poetry. So in my mind, she became the poetry. And maybe that's part of what, Susan, you're saying about performance also, but it also leads me to a question.
Yes.
What separates, for instance, Kellyanne Conway's alternative facts from the kind of imagination / performance you're commending to us?
Mm-hmm.
And what separates Amanda Gorman's performance from alternative facts, although Amanda was also giving us, in a positive sense, alternative facts, I think. So I'd be curious to hear you say some more about that.
I disagree with the latter. Okay. You're right to point out that Kellyanne Conway and the succession of press secretaries who devolved from Sean Spicer into what appeared to me to be an animated Barbie at the end. But that's a performance too. Kellyanne Conway was performing. The woman's field is marketing, right? So does it speak to the truth of the human condition, or is it trying to, I'm going to use the word damage, distort, undermine the deep truths of the human condition? I mean, there's something very profound in your question, because what is good and what is evil? I just taught a seminar for many years on good and evil. And you know good and you know evil by what it does.
Yes.
okay, what it does, what it performs. So, but that's a really provocative thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Who's next? Please go ahead.
Carrie.
Hi, I totally concur with you when you say that it drives you crazy to watch your 4-year-old granddaughters get into the whole princess thing.
Oh.
And I just, I mean, I loved your, I watched everything, but when you said that, it's like, I'm still gonna cry because I have a granddaughter and that's what she's into. And I feel so worried about it.
Well, I went so far as to research and find a website that sold princess scientist dresses. Seriously, seriously. Other people are also concerned about this. And so both my 5-year-old granddaughters got dresses, those long flowing, I mean, it's, what are they performing? What are these princess garbage things performing? Long flowing dresses. So these long flowing dresses have the solar system printed on them. And they, along with that, I sent science kits, okay, as the other Christmas present. And these have both been very popular. The granddaughters are wearing their princess scientist dresses. And after all, can't princesses be scientists? Says Granny. And so, but it is Betty Crocker. They're trying to force these little girls into the mold of the Disney princesses who are so passive. Now, Elsa and Anna, they kick butt, sure they do, and blah, blah. But, I think you got to do what you can. I mean, in raising 3 boys, right? I had to offer them examples of including, my husband and then others who are strong men who are also peace activists. And I am proud. I am proud that I have 3 sons who are peace activists. But we gotta fight this because it's kind of Betty Crocker with sparkles. And what's with the unicorns? I mean, everything is unicorns and rainbows and what. So you feel like singing with Elsa, let it go, let it go. Disney, they're clever. They're very, very clever. So there
Yes,
is.
they are.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. Susan, I want to push another question here, and that is, I was taken as you were by the, as it were, the civil religion that Biden et al. Have really been bringing to the fore. The marvelous, both the flags on the mall for the inauguration and the candles along the reflecting pool, and then last night at the White House with the candles. I mean, it's breathtaking and it's spiritual and it's performative and it's religion. And I just wonder what you think about that as a counterbalance to the kinds of authoritarian religious practices that have become so common in so many traditions and have gotten the most noise.
Yeah.
I wonder if we're looking at something here that's going to kind of tip that in a different way, so that rather than having simply the right and the left in a tradition, we also have this other kind of spiritually satisfying approach to how to be human and how to be human with each other, not just with grief, but also I'd love to see some joy, something that's also very joyful that we could see performed in that way, in a civil way. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Am I on the right track here, do you think? I think there may be some changing landscape of religion here that we want to keep an eye on.
Well, I mean, Hitler performed. He was great at it. Yeah. and he had flags, he had marches, he had, I mean, there's a vocabulary here that the previous occupant and, I mean, I wrote a column for Religious News Service. I don't only write for the Vale Daily because I think sometimes it's not appropriate in the local news venue, about giving up domestic terrorism for Lent and its influence on Christianity. And let's be frank, there are forms of Christianity that are feeding this, right? So it's not that Christianity is innocent and it's being, co-opted. It's a two-way street. So I think so. And it's it is a bully pulpit. The presidency is a bully pulpit. And this is twice now that I've been, but Major and Champ, I'm a very doggy person, and Major and Champ are also doing their work to make this White House not feel like the Reichstag, but a home, a home. It's the people's house. It's not this ghastly center of cruelty. So it's going to take a very long time to unwind this, though, Mary. And I think if it's kind of, I think the restarting the White House office on faith and community initiatives, a very good idea. Melissa Rogers is a saint of the universe. And she and I started Faith in Public Life together. I'm sure, Mary, you know her well. And I think this will bring back an interfaith dimension and a humanist dimension to what this country can be. I'm of the lines in this poem, we are striving, it's not a perfect union. It's not a perfect union. No. And we in a stark way, we have two visions in front of us now. Two. One is apartheid. One is very clearly a small group of wealthy white men will run this country and disenfranchise racial ethnic minorities, as well as others who don't get to play. And this other vision, this vision of, and she used hill, but it's not a city on a hill. It's not a New Jerusalem. It is a hill we've got to climb. And the religious imagery in this was far more coded, but it was there. And, hill in general is a very powerful spiritual metaphor because, you got to get up the hill. So,
Hold on, we got a couple of other people with questions, Susan. So if we could move on because we're going to run out of time.
Please, go ahead.
Anna Perkins would be next, and then Mary. Go ahead, Anna, you're welcome.
I'm joining all the way from Jamaica, and I really had to join.
Welcome.
Thanks, Mary. Because Susan, many years ago, I was very inspired as a young theologian by your book, Sex, Race, and God, and a woman of color coming from the Caribbean space. And I've listened to you just a while ago talk a little bit about the disenfranchisement, and a lot of the conversation has been around the US space. And I'm thinking of the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement has taken off, not just only in the North American space, but also has even flowed over into my space in Jamaica. So I wondered if you had any thoughts for us, any words for us, knowing that the disenfranchisement doesn't just stay in the North American space, but its tentacles have extended in very significant ways outside and even into my space.
Yes, well, I can scarcely say it better than you have. And I think in Rita's and my experience actually of researching prostitution around the world, uh, in different countries, race is constructed in different ways, but racism is universal. And it is a mechanism to deliver bodies to exploitation. That's what it's for. And so I think and I just want to mention that Lisa Garza, who is one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, is an artist. She's a spoken word artist, and she's a performance artist. And she does art events as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. And of course, they did the paintings and the thing. And I think your point is crucial, that this is a global phenomenon, but it is also, we are exporting it. We are exporting it. The shooter in New Zealand was watching videos of the young man who shot up Mother Emanuel Church. So, with the internet, hate can spread, and models of hate can spread. So, but thank you for underlining that. It's saying, and the pictures of London and Paris and all around the world and throughout the Caribbean, Latin America, was very, very inspiring to people.
Thank you. Mary, I'm going to take your question and then I'm going to wrap, and then we're going to leave the Zoom open so we can continue to chat. So Mary will have the last question, and then we'll continue conversation after we dismiss, so that people who need to leave at the top of the hour can do so. Mary, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I was really taken by, well, I found it interesting that you watched the progression of the spokespersons in the last administration, how they ended up as Barbies. And I also was very struck by the way Amanda Gorman presented herself when she was doing the poem. I thought that was brilliant, how she embodied really what she was speaking about. But I was disturbed right afterwards, because I think in the last administration, they saw women as people who looked a certain way, but that they echoed what, the patriarch was saying. As long as you say what I say, and, and give out iterations of that, that's fine. So then Amanda comes along and she presents herself somewhat differently. And then she's immediately signed up for the IMG, the modeling thing. And so wasn't Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman's daughter. And I said, what are we doing, to these young women who are coming forward and presenting a very unique way of being in the world? And we're
Mary, your sound is out, so I'm going to have Susan respond, and then we'll wrap up and then continue the discussion. But I think we get your point that wow, yes, Susan.
See previous conversation on Disney princesses, okay? You're right. No, capitalists aren't fools. They see where the power is. Now, can you, as Emily Dickinson said, I use Christianity more than I let it use me. Now, can these women use capitalism more than they let it use them, take the money and run? I don't know. But it is that they know power. They know power. They're really good at it.
Yes, and these are young women finding their way. Hence the need for other women to help them find their way and follow them as they go.
It is my understanding that Michelle Obama is mentoring Amanda Gorman. Chicago friends are weighing in on that. Go ahead, Mary. Sorry.
What could be better than that?
Right.
What could be better than that? Let me thank you, Susan, my dear. Great hour, and always so important to be with you and to hear your wisdom and insights. And we thank you just from the bottom of our hearts. And I await that 5th book, and I always read them first because I blurb them. So don't hold out on me, Susan. Send me that book as soon as possible. I'm up for a new. I'm
only up to chapter 7.
That's all right. I'll wait. Thank you so much. This was great, and we will continue the conversation as soon as I make the final announcements. And people who need to leave can. And Sheila Curran will be the first questioner once we once we finish up here. Thank you, everybody. Happy birthday to Annabeth, a day late. And continue the conversation. Those who have to leave, please feel free to do so with our gratitude, and those who can stay on or want to. Sheila's got a question.
Well, thank you, and thank you for a wonderful presentation, Susan. I suppose my question around the performance, political world and religion, performance or the pseudo idea of faith that can be wrecked into coming out of a Latin American experience and the use of violence against women and torture by militaries aided and abetted under the pseudo idea of faith and the bar against, I suppose, truth and truth telling. And I suppose I was really thinking of, there was a Ursuline sister died last week by the name of Diana Ortiz, who was brutally raped when she worked in Guatemala during a period of time, and really performed in a way out of her pain and suffering to try and get truth telling, along with not only for herself, but the Guatemalan people, along with the people in El Salvador, in the same way that some of the people were there and across the Latin American continent, where both church, particularly in the Catholic domain, as well as in other Christian domains, tried to keep that idea of both the rape and the violence and the brutality that were inflicted on these women, and the political aid of the United States government in the whole military support, that is still ongoing. And that is still going on in governments that proclaim human rights to be of a value and proclaim to be Christian or whatever other faith denominations that they're in. And the same in relation to refugees and migrants and their treatment. And so I just wonder, with Joe Biden being very much Catholic in his idea of proclamation and teaching, that will his actions match in terms of the human rights, while the performance or the imaging or the poetry telling or the acting, will that cloud what was really going on in the world of human rights, and particularly that towards women and children?
Well, we shall see, won't we?
Because there's a danger that performance and poetry, and while it can be very powerful, it can also cloud.
Right.
It can be the winning voice. And like, while I was very taken by Amanda, I was also very taken by the fact that it was all imagery and poetry and action. I'm dying to see how don't tell me, what you do, just, show me that it really changes in terms of policy, in terms of collusion with other countries, and particularly around trafficking, prostitution, violence against women, you name it, because they're much harder. They don't come in the performance in the same way, or when they are performed and talked about and brought out, there are very few that want to really, really hear.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not as decorated out as in I just wondered about that when you were big on the performance and imagery and poetry, which I also see and appreciate and value. But I just had that question.
Well, performance in the absence of action to follow it up, right, is just play acting. I think, but as you were talking, I mean, one of the ultimate performances of abuse of power is torture.
Mm-hmm.
And I categorize domestic violence and rape as torture, as you know, since you've seen and read Women's Bodies as Battlefields.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it is a spectacle. It's a spectacle of power.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, they're not fools, these folks.
Mm-hmm.
People respond to spectacle. And hopefully, people can also imagine hope. I'm very taken with what Mary just said about hope and strategy. I asked my middle son, who's a physician, and you're a primary care physician in the last year of COVID. I mean, I check on the child all the time, and I asked him what he needed, and he said, I need hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's crucial, but you can't, hope can be fantasy. You can't imagine it. I mean, I think that's the difference between the play acting and the performance. And, I'm feeling my way through this with fiction. But I mean, I am the product in a good way of books I have read, books that have changed me, poems that have changed me. So, but you perfectly well know there is no single action that's going to fix this. I think knowing people in the previous administration and in the the Carter Center does as much as they can to perform. There's female genital cutting. Let me just put this out there. They don't just go to places and talk about stuff. Female genital cutting is now being eradicated in Nigeria because of the work of the Carter Center with partners, Christian pastors, imams, local leaders, and they don't mess around. They don't mess around. But it takes a very long time. So, good words. Thank you very much.
And just to say the other thing, a priest in Peru called Gustavo Gutierrez used to always say, hope does not come out of the sky in a parachute. Hope is something you need to create, and it's a Christian's duty to create hope.
Yep.
So he used to say that from back in 1968 onwards. So I think it is the other side of the coin. How do you create it in times of really difficulty?
Yeah.
But thank you. It's something I struggle with very much about women, particularly rape and violence and war and terror, whether it is more obvious or more subtly played out across the world order. But in my own experience working in Latin America, it is and still continues to be very brutal and gruesome and aided and abetted by now with the whole transnational world as well. So.
Well, as you know, the cover of the book is a memorial.
That's right. Yeah.
The victims of violence in Latin America, women victims, femicide. They invented the term
femicide. That's right.
Yeah.
And it's got worse.
Oh yeah.
Since COVID, yeah. That's everything.
Mary, you're muted.
Go ahead, Diane.
Sheila, I just want to thank you for raising Diana Ortiz's name. For those of us in the justice community, and especially people like yourself who have worked for many, many years in Latin America. I'm sorry about that. Sorry about that. Diana's death this week just brought so much to the surface. What you're talking about, Susan, and what you're talking about, Sheila. And of course, it's front page of the Post and front page of the Times and obituaries everywhere. And in light of today's conversation, somebody like Diana Ortiz, her very life on the line, the torture that happened to her, everything that we have learned about her, we can talk about hope, we can talk about performance, but somehow this woman embodied something that has captured us and brought the U.S. government to honesty and to the whole of the dirty wars in Latin America to the fore. At what cost? I mean, we could spend the rest of our lives talking about suffering and torture, and we're in Lent, Jesus on the cross, which I don't spend my life talking about. But here is somebody who totally embodied it and is mirroring this back to us. What are we doing with our own lives? What does it mean? That's what you brought to the fore just now in me, Sheila. Thank you. And you, Susan, too. Thank you.
Well, violence against women is a dirty war.
Dirty war.
Gail, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just a brief one. I was so taken listening to your October lectures and then today also with the idea that you are promoting that the arts are kind of antidote to this information apocalypse. And it just strikes me so powerfully. From what I understand, in authoritarian regimes, among the disappeared first are the artists, poets, and so on with imagination. They disappear early on. I look at the White House and the previous occupant, I commented so many times, never seemed to be hosting artists or musical concerts or anything like that. He hosted some football players, but I never noticed any artistic performances brought to the White House, in contrast to the Obama White House,
right,
where there were many performances and so on. So it strikes me that can be, that in a way is a kind of litmus test on where and how we're being led.
Oh, yes. And anybody has actually seen the traveling exhibit, the Nazis banned art, the paintings and statues that they banned, many of them by LGBTQ folk. No, I think that's, it's obvious that, there was no poetry in this person's soul, or still is.
But another refinement of that, of course, was that the athletes who arrived at the White House were served boxed McDonald's and Popeyes and whatever else they thought these persons would like, whereas Michelle Obama had a garden. And one of the first gestures apparently of Joe Biden was to reap to reap a bit of a harvest from that garden of whatever's, God forbid, whatever has stayed over the time, and send the basket up to Kamala Harris from the White House. So that was I read about that. It was a really lovely gesture.
Well, another plug for the Carter Center. Carter Center food, when you go there for conferences,
marvelous,
is all organic, all vegetarian, and so forth. I was going through the line with, but bowls of peanuts all over the place. And President Carter, one day, have some. They're very good for you.
But one of the things about the Carter Center that impressed me when I was there was how gracious the hospitality was.
Yes,
you actually had persons who welcomed you and showed you around, where to go, and so that you'd feel comfortable. I mean, those kinds of human touches that we have been bereft of in the public arena here in the last bit since the Obamas left. It's surprising how much the leadership from the top makes a difference.
Sure, and the Valentines on the lawn.
I know.
I mean, just it's like, I was like, yes, it's hokey and it's heteropatriarchal, but it's fine.
Well, it was kitschy, but it was sweet.
Kitschy,
and
very sweet, very sweet.
It was kitsch more than anything, but it was lovely, and that they wanted to do that. I mean, why not? But I want to ask you, what do you think about this whole worry that I have, that not just things like that, but that just the relief, the palpable relief. People say they're sleeping better, they're breathing easier, which we needed. I mean, we would have lost a lot more people if this had gone on much longer. But the palpable relief, does this in a way take us off our game? I mean, do we become less critical then of the things that we need to be critical about in the current administration? I mean, is there a way in which we have to be careful here? I think so, frankly. I think we have to be very careful that we not move out of the critical capacity that we exercise both to like things as well as to not like them, seems to me as important a critical faculty as we used during the years we didn't like anything.
Oh, I agree, Mary. I felt the same thing when President Obama was elected. And I remember the first column I wrote for the Washington Post criticizing President Obama. Yeah. And I felt like a rat, but it's necessary, right? I mean, we are in a, and I'm also worrying about losing my edge in terms of activism. I got a great email, says pick one race that you're going to focus on until the next election cycle. I thought it was good advice. Just get deeply involved in one crucial election. But I've been like sleeping, oh, doggies. And, you know, we deserve a little of that. We really do. And, you know, but now that they're sort of wading through the executive orders, and a lot of that garbage is out of the way, not all of it. But, you know, but I sobbed through Merrick Garland's hearing, right? I mean, and so did he. It's not just a change in policy, it's a change in the human beings who are
the mental quality that he exhibited. And you say, why isn't he on the court? You know, but if he can't be on the court, he can be attorney general. So he may not be on the court yet. You don't know.
Only I wondered if you might want to offer a millennial observation.
That awkward middle ground between Gen Z and millennial. Yeah, I mean, this has just been, Janice Poss, I really liked, I think you were the person who put in the chat the documentary, The Social Dilemma. And that was my first introduction to this. The intensity or the thoroughness that this is just bred throughout everything that we do online. Being not someone who directly grew up, like I grew up with VHS tapes and cassettes, but quickly then learned the ways of the internet, probably sooner than I should have. And like thinking about then having, the formative years there too, kind of, I think it's probably been a little bit more recent that it's been completely algorithmically controlled, but yeah, I don't know if I have any like hot takes or like this is how I see it from my perspective, but I really appreciated what you had to share. And
well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I did. And I never was above calling on students in class. So there you go. But it's important to remember the generational differences. And when you came in to this cyber reality and how you negotiate it and a great deal of the discrimination of people in the vaccinations for COVID is a inability to access the internet for elders. And I'm pretty internet savvy. We have gotten our vaccines, our shots by my persistently checking these websites and getting on as soon as there was a spot. I volunteered to help get other people our age, but you're prohibited because it's confidential health information that has to be entered in. But this is so generationally insensitive, as well as communities are not only redlined in terms of housing and jobs and so forth and so on, but racial ethnic minority communities are redlined in terms of internet service. So, I mean, it's so white privileged. And I don't even mean the Florida people who are only vaccinating in wealthy zip codes. I mean, it's people not thinking of a non-cyber world that a lot of people still live in. And that's also online schooling and all the rest. So it's important when I, pontificate about these things and we talk about local news, still the majority of Americans get their news, or at least some of their news, from their local papers. So, and not from Twitter. All right, Mayor, fun as usual.
Hey, listen, Susan, thanks so much. This was great. And best wishes on your various projects. And thanks to everybody for being
Thank
here.
you, everybody.
A really wonderful session, I think. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Be well.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.